She was about 440 feet long with a general cargo. It was a crew of 47. And at her head was a Bolton shipmaster, aged only 35. His name was Captain Stanley Lord, and he had made a meteoric rise in his profession, and he had a reputation as a fine navigator.
In Lord's own words, it was an extraordinary night. The sea was completely flat calm. There was a clear night.
No waves, no nothing. Absolutely calm. There's no moon, but plenty of stars.
That Sunday had proven to be a long day, at least for the captain of the single-funnel cargo ship.
The night of the accident, Lord had been on duty for a long shift of 16 hours, and he was tired. You know, he was in an ice field. He was command of a ship, and he wanted to make sure it was safe.
The coal strike is important for another, possibly more sinister reason. Most other ships were desperate for coal, and passengers and cargo destined for the New World were stuck in Europe. Yet, the Leyland liner Californian, under the command of Captain Stanley Lord, left the port of London on the 5th of April, 1912, just 5 days before Titanic's departure from Southampton, not only fully coaled, but apart from her own crew, empty of passengers. With more than enough coal to get her to the United States, she headed off into the middle of the Atlantic at full speed, empty. Apart from a cargo of woolen sweaters. So why, then, was the Californian stopped? Had she reached her destination, and was she now waiting?
Just 15 miles north of the Titanic, the British Leyland Line steamship SS Californian had stopped for the night after spotting 3 icebergs and thick ice beds. As her captain, Stanley Lord, made his way back to his cabin, he spotted a light on the horizon. He asked his third officer if there was any ships in the vicinity, to which he replied only Titanic. Lord asked for the Titanic to be contacted to let her know they were stuck in ice. Third Officer Evans dully dispatched a message and reportedly received a curt reply from Titanic's operator Jack Phillips. "Shut up, I'm busy. I'm working."
Bloody hell! Christ. It's that idiot on the Californian.
Tell him to sod off.
I'll do more than that. Keep out! Shut up! I'm working.
Arrogant bastard. I try and warn him about the ice and he tells me to shut up. Well, that's it for me. I'm shutting down. Night. Night.
At about midnight, the Titanic started sending up her distress rockets.
Pull! That's 6 rockets she's fired, sir.
Yes. Maybe I better tell the captain. What is it?
That big steamer, sir. She's firing rockets. 6 up to now.
Or perhaps they're company signals of some kind.
Captain Lord asked what colour the rockets were. In fact, over the next 2 hours, Lord repeatedly asked his officers about the colour of the rockets. Was he expecting to see red or blue signals?
The captain thinks she must be signaling to another ship about the ice.
Looks a bit queer, doesn't she?
I'll try signaling her again.
As if she's listing.
That's because of the angle she's at to us.
Captain Lord asked what colour the rockets were. In fact, over the next 2 hours, Lord repeatedly asked his officers about the colour of the rockets. Was he expecting to see red or blue signals? Very likely. But whether he was or not, the answer from the bridge was always the same. Only white rockets could be seen.
Oh, I asked the captain, shall I send up some distress rockets? Then we started sending off these distress rockets, the quartermaster and I on the bridge. But I never knew how many I had fired. I knew very well that there was some in the box. The box holds a dozen, and when I told the captain, I said, there are still some in there, sir, but I don't know how many I fired. And eventually, this steamer approached and approached until you could see all her lights with a naked eye. And I should say that she must have been within 5 miles off. You could not only see her lights with a naked eye, but you could see the lights in her portholes. So I reckon that she must have been within 5 miles. And then eventually she turned away and showed a stern light. And about that time, the captain came across the bridge and said, Mr. Boxall, you go away in that boat, pointing to the port emergency boat number 2. And he said, hurry up, Mr. Wilde is waiting to lower it. So I said, you see that white light over there? So pointing it out to him, he said, yes. I said, that is the stern light of that ship.
Of course, there are still threats of legal things even these days about whether the ship that was so close to us was the Californian or not. I mean, I saw that ship. It's terribly close. And the other thing I'm saying is that I didn't see a ship 19 miles away. I saw a ship that was so close, and they said at the time it was less than 9 miles away. Now they're trying to say it was 19. I saw it, you know, it wasn't just lights on the horizon, you could see it was a ship. And I saw our rockets being fired, which that ship must have seen. Well, this inquiry says that they did see it, but they didn't think it was a portent of danger. But I would have thought in the middle of the Atlantic, in the middle of the night, that rockets must mean trouble.
I remember looking over the rail and seeing a fully lighted ship very close by. I've always said that I saw a man walking on the deck, and I did. They claim I didn't, but I was extremely far-sighted. As a matter of fact, I had defective eyesight, and I was too far-sighted. Now that ship, we were told, was the California. And it was the California. With all the denials that have been made since, it was the California.
How are you so sure of that?
What's that?
How are you so sure of that?
Because officers on the Titanic told us all, don't worry, the California will pick up everybody in case you don't come back for breakfast. Now, we were told we were only going to leave because it was rules and regulations. No danger whatsoever. So I went to bed.
It was 35 minutes before the first distress signal was sent. 35 minutes before the first radio emergency, CQD, was sent. 45 minutes before starting the pumps. 45 minutes before starting to prepare the lifeboats. And a full hour and 25 minutes before the first one was launched.
So this section, I spotted what I thought was a very strange mark on Titanic's hull, and it's just there. The next photograph following on from there shows the same diagonal black mark, but the ship is at a different angle. She's moved.
In the two photographs, the camera angle and position has changed significantly. But the mysterious mark, over 30 feet long, doesn't change position.
And if you blow the image up even more, and particularly that area, you will see that the top part of that black diagonal mark follows the line of the hull plating.
What you found is absolutely inexplicable. We were looking at the exact area where the iceberg struck, and we appeared to have a weakness or damage to the hull in that specific place before she even left Belfast.
If the Titanic had been weakened in the very region where it would be struck by an iceberg, it could rewrite history. But what could lie behind the mark? The photographs reminded Senham of a fact known generally only to Titanic historians. The ship suffered a fire. The fire took hold in a coal bunker in Boiler Room 6, and the room is directly behind the place where the dark mark begins. The fire was mentioned in the official inquiry in 1912, but was judged to have played no role in the disaster. John Dilley was one of a team of firemen and stokers who kept the hungry Titanic boilers fed with coal. Dilley describes a serious fire in one of the ship's huge coal storage bunkers. It was discovered the day the Titanic prepared to leave Belfast for Southampton and begin her maiden voyage. The procedure for coal bunker fires was to dig out the burning coal before the fire spread. But the Titanic was the biggest ship ever built. Her coal bunkers were 3 stories high.
He said, my sole duty, together with 11 other men. That's how many fought the fire. It's incredible. If you couldn't have an easily extinguished fire, that spoke to me of a very major fire. And this is what Dilley is saying. Listen to him. He says, there were hundreds of tons of coal
stored there. We made no headway against it.
4 days later, and the fire was getting worse.
But still, here is Dilley making serious claims about this fire. We didn't get that fire out.
From the day we sailed, the Titanic was on fire.
On the 10th of April 1912, the Titanic set sail from Southampton. The upper decks housed dozens of millionaires, including Benjamin Guggenheim and Lady Astor. The lower decks held over 2,000 passengers. Yet no one was told about the fire raging below. The men were under strict orders to keep quiet.
Of course, sir. The passengers knew nothing of the fire.
The officers told us to keep
our mouths shut.
The fire was discovered the day the Titanic set sail from Belfast. But the coal had been loaded into its bunkers 3 weeks earlier.
I have accounts from people who went on board at Belfast and who saw a smouldering coal fire in the coal bunker there. Does that mean it must necessarily have been there for weeks already?
The coal was stacked directly against the hull and a watertight internal division called a bulkhead. Both were critical to the ship's strength. Exposing them to the extreme temperatures of a coal fire would have been incredibly dangerous.
Guillermo was telling me incredible things, that it was blazing for weeks before anyone even noticed, long before the ship even set sail from Belfast.
Back in 1912, the scale of the blaze seems to have spooked the firemen who travelled with the ship to Southampton. Only 8 of the original crew of 160 took the onward journey to America. It was an unprecedented change of crew. So why would Titanic's owners go ahead and send their brand new flagship to sea with a major fire below decks? Could the answer lie in the troubled origins of the Olympic-class liners? On the surface, they were a prestige project. "50% bigger than any other ship afloat. They were so large that new docks had to be built just to moor the Titanic and her sister ship, the Olympic.
She is billed in some quarters as Queen of the Ocean, and a spectacular career is envisaged for her. She is literally a wonder of the world.
But in reality, owners White Star were losing business to rivals Cunard. White Star's chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, was under pressure to turn the company around.
The commercial urgency that was driving the White Star Line was driving them to cut certain corners that they didn't necessarily have to cut in order to get these ships to sea right away.
On several occasions, J. Bruce Ismay responded to budgetary pressures by amending their plans.
There were reductions in the scantlings and the dimensions of the steel, the number of lifeboats. I think their finances were so fragile, it could have brought White Star down.
In the aftermath of the sinking, the British government were pressured into setting up an inquiry. It was held in the Scottish Drill Hall in London.
The hearings were held at the Scottish Drill Hall in London, where the acoustics were so bad that spectators in the public galleries found it difficult to hear everything that was said. Lord Mersey had complained about the unfortunate choice of venue, but then again it had been booked by his son.
This is a shrine to what happened and all the evidence that was given.
The inquiry was overseen by Commissioner Lord Mersey, and more than 100 people were called to give evidence. Most were top brass from the shipping company. For 11 days, the coal bunker fire was barely mentioned. Firemen at the inquiry revealed that the bulkhead had been severely damaged by the fire.
It was dented. The bottom of the watertight compartment was warped.
Throughout the inquiry, Lord Mersey seemed uninterested in the fire and eager to move on.
Commissioner Lord Mersey doesn't want to know. Right. He was making repeated interruptions and closing it down.
As for Lord Mersey himself, he simply didn't ask or allow to be asked the right questions. The press, who were there throughout the hearings and could have done something about it, were more interested in the scandal surrounding the lucky escape of J. Bruce Ismay. Other expert naval officers told Lord Mersey that even on a moonless night there'd be no difficulty spotting an iceberg from as far away as 6 or even 10 miles. Remember, the full turning circle of the Titanic at top speed was only 3/4 of a mile. The whole British inquiry was a whitewash. Captain Smith would not be blamed because he was no longer alive and could not defend himself. The lookouts were not to blame. The design and construction of the Titanic was not to blame. Neither were her officers or her owners. In fact, no one was to blame, except Captain Lord. Captain Lord stood alone. Was Captain Lord being made a scapegoat because he had failed to do what he'd been engaged to do on the night of the disaster?
One April morning in Dublin in 1912, Jesuit novitiate Frank Brown received a surprise gift in the post: a 2-day cruise on the world's largest liner. With a letter of introduction and a little Irish charm, Frank made friends with the head purser, Hugh McElroy, seen here next to Captain Smith.
Somebody introduced him to Mr. McElroy, and he obviously gave him the run of the ship because Frank, during his 24 hours aboard, was able to visit the stem and stern and upstairs and downstairs. His first class ticket was for 37A, and When he was handed the plan of the liner to find 37A, he opened up this big, large plan and could find no 37A or 37B for that matter. So even though the heading on the plan said that it is plan of Titanic, Frank crossed that out and said this is a plan of the Olympic that differed in several respects. For example, it doesn't show my cabin. So he had to draw it in, and he shows that my suite was here. Bedroom, bathroom, and sitting room. When he went down to his meals in the first-class dining room, he found himself sitting beside an American couple, very well-to-do and obviously loaded, so much so that they said, hey, listen, we'll pay your fare the rest of the way to New York if you stay on with us. They were obviously very taken by him.
Frank Brown accompanied his dining companions to the Marconi room, where they sent a telegram to his Jesuit superior in Dublin, known as Provincial, requesting permission to stay on board. The picture seen here is the only one ever taken of the Marconi room on Titanic. When they arrived in Cove, Ireland, Titanic's final stop and embarkation point, the written reply Frank Brown received was abrupt.
He loved showing people the 5-word telegram, get off that ship, Provincial.
At the end of the day, who's controlling these bankers even? Jesuits. It's this control of the bloodline families. And by the way, that's not an anti-Catholic statement. This is the army of these people. But there's a component here that is not godly. Take it for what you will.
In order to create the central bank, certain obstacles had to be overcome. First, those opposed to a central bank would need to be removed, and secondly, the law would need to be changed, or simply appear to be changed. To deal with the troublesome individuals who opposed a central bank, the Jesuits spared no expense. They built a ship of death called the Titanic.
The sinking of the Titanic was the design of the Jesuit order to get rid of the opposition to the creation of a central bank in the United States.
And the men on the Titanic were opposed to a central bank. They had to die. Among those were John Jacob Astor, Isidor Straus, Benjamin Guggenheim, and a host of other millionaires who were opposed to a central bank in America. Therefore, they had to be taken out of the way. And they were on the Titanic.
The company building the ship was owned by J.P. Morgan, who was himself an agent of the Rothschilds family, the Rothschilds being the bankers for the Pope and the Vatican. The main Jesuit targets were brought on board. The captain of the ship was Edward John Smith. It appears from his actions that Captain Smith was a Jesuit coadjutor, that is, a Jesuit who has taken the oath but does not wear the robes. A coadjutor blends into the scenery and never looks like a Jesuit priest. It is a veteran sea captain, Edward Smith, who orders the ship to travel through an 80-square-mile ice field at full speed on a moonless night. There had been over 8 telegrams warning the captain of the danger.
He's warned 8 times, slow the ship down, slow the Titanic down, you're going too fast. Not once stopped. Knew there was an iceberg field up ahead, knew that he should have slowed down, but didn't. And so you look and you say, how was it that this man could go headlong into a field of icebergs and not slow the ship down, not be more careful?
This was supposed to be the best, safest ship captain in the world at the time. The admiral's admiral, if you will, Captain Smith. and very highly regarded, just like the ship, the Unsinkable. And in order to bait people into some level of confidence in his abilities.
As the Titanic was coming up along the coast of England, it had various stops. And at one stop, a Jesuit priest got on board. His name was Francis Brown. Francis Brown got on board the Titanic, took pictures of all of the wealthy people, took pictures of Edward Smith, the captain, and then, just before the Titanic set sail across the Atlantic, Francis Brown got off. And then, of course, the Titanic sunk.
Well, Francis Brown is given a camera by his bishop, by his uncle, the bishop, and he is told to go down and take all these pictures of all these people we're going to kill in first class. And so that's what he does. He takes a picture of all these rich people, everybody that's there is going to go down, and a rich passenger offers him passage. Well, he knows the ship's going to go down, but he very sheepishly got in contact with his provincial. And the provincial's message was, get off that ship.
Like Brown, another noted passenger, Jesuit agent J.P. Morgan, did not make the ill-fated sea voyage. Even though booked on the ship for passage to America, Morgan also fortuitously canceled at the last minute.
Of course, J.P. Morgan, he had his own suite reserved for him. And there were some 55 men who at the last minute canceled their reservations on the Titanic. J.P. Morgan was one of them. Said he was sick. Oh, by the way, and don't load any of my art treasures on the Titanic either. So he didn't have any of his art treasures on it either. Didn't lose any of that. And the Jesuits were not only the captain, but his officers, and there had been a strike in England at the time, and the men who were normally the ones who would man the ocean liners, they were replaced by Jesuit coadjutors ready to board because they were all under oath to die for the Black Pope if necessary, and so they did carry out the sinking of the Titanic.
But how is it possible that men will commit suicide as Captain Smith and some of his hand-picked crew obviously did?
We have to understand that these men have died to their own self-will. And so they have completely been emptied of their own personalities, and upon the order of their commander will do exactly what they're told. There's no such thing as a disobedient Jesuit. This serves as a warning to all the other men of power, not only in our country, but in England and Europe. You mess with us, and we're going to do to you what we did to all those people on Titanic, and we're going to thwart the investigation, because a subsequent investigation of the sinking of Titanic blamed Bruce Ismay, the right-hand man of J.P. Morgan, and Captain Ward of England. They were the scapegoats, when they could have easily blamed the men of power at that time. It's a whitewash and cover-up, and that cover-up is even more powerful than the murder itself.
The Titanic was never, ever, ever intended to make the crossing intact. It had to go down. It was a ritual. It was a death ship. From the day it was put on the drawing boards, it was designed to be a death ship. The end result of that was this event, which had already been planned for prior to that. This was just a interim planning session to make sure they had all the dots and tittles in the right place, leading up to the 1913 vote on Christmas Eve. What a Christmas present, to create the Federal Reserve Board, a private entity, no more federal than Federal Express, which would create and manage America's money supply and charge us interest for managing our money, just paper. They don't provide any gold backing. They don't provide any real management assistance, except that they're big. It's a bunch of mobsters. Bloodline, family, European monsters. Mostly out of the city of London. Remember, the only person on planet Earth, the only place where the Queen of England or whatever reigning monarch in England has to present themselves annually to someone else and curtsy to them is the mayor of the city of London. Why? Because the power behind the throne, the real money, behind all the royal bloodline families, these Kanes, these kings, those people get their power because they work as a team and they control all the governments of the world because they control the money out of the city of London. The Queen presents herself to the mayor with her shoes off, curtsies, and defers to his authority, his power, the bankers.